When I found a cold paper plate covered in aluminum foil sitting on my front porch, I thought it was a mistake. But when I peeled back the foil and saw a single slice of turkey, a scoop of congealed mashed potatoes, and a text message from my mother reading, "We didn't want to crowd the car. Enjoy your dinner," my heart completely shattered. While I stood under the flickering porch light in the freezing November air, my parents were driving my golden child younger sister across the state to a lavish family Thanksgiving dinner at my billionaire uncle's estate, a dinner I had spent 3 weeks preparing side dishes for. They thought they could treat me like an unwanted stray dog, and I'd just accept it. They had no idea that tonight was the absolute last straw. I didn't cry. Instead, I went inside, packed my entire life into 4 suitcases, and vanished. My name is Audrey, and I am 34 years old. For as long as I can remember, my existence has been defined not by who I am, but by who I am not. I am not Chloe. Chloe is my younger sister, a girl who has spent her entire life wrapped in the warm, suffocating blanket of my parents' absolute adoration. In our household, Chloe was the golden child who could commit no sin, while I was the invisible ghost who kept the machinery of our family running. If Chloe scraped her knee, the world stopped. If I won an academic scholarship, it was met with a distracted nod and a reminder to set the dinner table. I spent decades absorbing the emotional blows, convincing myself that if I just worked harder, cooked better, and gave more of myself, my parents would finally look at me with that same proud warmth they reserved exclusively for her. The illusion finally shattered 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. My mother called me, her voice dripping with an unusual, sweet urgency that immediately made my guard go up. She explained that my billionaire Uncle Arthur was hosting a lavish family dinner at his sprawling estate across the state. It was a high society affair, the kind of event my parents desperately relied on to pretend they belonged to a higher social echelon. But instead of a genuine invitation, her call was a list of demands. She needed me to prepare 3 of my signature gourmet side dishes, labor-intensive recipes that took days of shopping and meticulous prep work, so they could present them as part of the family's contribution. Eager to please, I agreed, thinking this was my chance to finally sit at the table as an equal. Thanksgiving morning arrived, and I poured my heart into those dishes. I spent 6 hours roasting garlic potatoes, baking a pecan tart, and perfecting a cranberry souffle. Dressed in my finest clothes, I sat by the window, waiting for my family to arrive. At precisely 2 o'clock, I heard their car pull into the driveway. I rushed to the front door, a smile forming. Through the glass, I watched my father step out. He didn't walk toward the house or look up. Instead, he hastily dropped a foil-wrapped paper plate onto my concrete porch, turned on his heel, and hurried back to the sedan. In the passenger seat, Chloe was laughing hysterically at her phone. They immediately sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the freezing air. I opened the door, my chest tightening as the wind hit my face. There lay the flimsy plate. Beneath the foil were lukewarm scraps of turkey and congealed potatoes. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We didn't want to crowd the car. Enjoy your dinner." The sheer cruelty of it paralyzed me. They had taken my side dishes from the refrigerator the night before, ensuring their own feast was perfect, while discarding me like trash. I stared at the text, completely numb. Something shifted. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city or country you are watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." Standing on that freezing porch with the pathetic plate of scraps in my hands, a strange thing happened. The overwhelming sadness I expected to feel never came. Instead, it was replaced by a wave of absolute, crystalline clarity. The desperate, eager-to-please daughter, who had spent 34 years begging for crumbs of affection, died right there on that concrete step. I realized with perfect certainty that you cannot force people to love you, and I was entirely done trying. I walked back inside, set the plate on the counter without tasting a single bite, and went straight to my bedroom. I pulled my large suitcases out of the closet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just packed methodically, folding my clothes and gathering my legal documents. Over the next 48 hours, I quietly liquidated my local assets, sold my furniture online for whatever I could get, and notified the national corporate headquarters of my remote job that I was requesting a permanent transfer to their East Coast regional division. I bought a one-way ticket to Boston, putting exactly 3,000 miles between myself and the toxic environment that had suffocated me for decades. Before boarding the plane, I took my phone out one last time. I didn't send a dramatic goodbye text or demand an explanation. I simply went through my contacts and permanently blocked my mother, my father, and Chloe. I deleted my personal social media accounts and severed ties with anyone who might feed them information. I completely vanished into the freezing winter morning, leaving them with absolutely no way to track me down. 7 years passed in a blink of an eye. In Boston, I didn't just survive, I completely remade myself from the ground up. The quiet, invisible woman who once begged for her family's validation was gone, replaced by a confident, highly sought-after corporate consultant. I climbed the professional ladder rapidly, built a beautiful circle of genuine friends, and married a wonderful man who actually valued my presence. For the first time in my life, I knew what true emotional safety felt like. I never looked back, and I never unlocked the digital vault where I had buried the memories of my past life. Unbeknownst to me, however, cosmic justice was quietly playing out 3,000 miles away. Free from my stabilizing influence, my parents had poured every single cent of their retirement and life savings into enabling Chloe's increasingly chaotic lifestyle. They blindly funded her failed fashion boutique, her lavish influencer vacations, and her mountain of credit card debt, all to maintain the illusion of her golden status. By the 7th year, the money ran completely dry, leaving my parents on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. The collision of our two worlds happened completely by chance at a high-end corporate gala in downtown Boston. My firm was sponsoring the event, and I arrived looking elegant, wearing a designer evening gown as a respected VIP guest of honor. As I walked toward the main ballroom, I stopped dead in my track. There, standing behind the heavy velvet drapes of the event registration and catering desk, were my mother, my father, and Chloe. Dressed in cheap server uniforms, they were desperately trying to pass out appetizers and hand out name tags, eagerly attempting to rub elbows with wealthy clients to somehow save themselves from ruin. The moment Chloe's eyes swept over the crowd and landed on me, her jaw literally dropped. She frantically nudged my mother, pointing a trembling, manicured finger in my direction. Within seconds, both of them abandoned their posts at the registration desk, pushing past wealthy executives to reach me. My mother instantly burst into a flood of theatrical, breathless tears, throwing her arms around me before I could even step back. She sobbed loudly, claiming that they had been desperately searching for me for 7 agonizing years, and that leaving that cold paper plate on my porch had just been a silly, tragic misunderstanding they regretted every single day. Chloe stood right beside her, nodding rapidly with a look of intense, synthetic sympathy plastered across her face. But I wasn't the naive 34-year-old girl they had discarded anymore. I stood perfectly still, my posture rigid, refusing to return the embrace. As my mother pulled away, her eyes greedily scanned my expensive jewelry and my designer gown, and the true motivation behind their sudden emotional breakdown became sickeningly clear. They didn't miss me, they were drowning. My mother quickly leaned in close, her voice dropping to a frantic, desperate whisper. She bypassed any real questions about my life and pivoted straight to their severe financial ruin. She began spinning a sob story about how the bank was threatening to foreclose on their home, how Chloe's mounting debts were crushing them, and how I was morally obligated as their daughter to use my obvious wealth to bail them out of this disaster. They actually believed they could manipulate me back into the trap. I looked at their desperate faces and forced a calm, compliant smile. I told them we shouldn't cause a scene at a high-profile corporate gala, and instead invited them to meet me at my firm's private conference room downtown the following morning to discuss a permanent financial arrangement. A wave of immense relief washed over my parents and Chloe. They exchanged that familiar, smug look of mutual understanding, clearly believing that the gullible, eager-to-please daughter was walking right back into their trap. When they walked into the sleek office building the next morning, they were smiling brightly, practically radiating triumph. But the moment they sat down, I didn't open a checkbook. Instead, I slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany table. Chloe pulled out the document, expecting a wire transfer, but her face instantly turned a sickly shade of white. It was not a financial lifeline. It was a formal court injunction backed by a mountain of evidence gathered by my private legal team. Over the last 7 years, Chloe had used my old social security number and abandoned identity to secure fraudulent business loans and lines of credit to fund her failing lifestyle. I looked directly at my trembling sister and terrified parents. I handed them a pen and a total liability release form, giving them a brutal choice: sign the paperwork legally, surrendering any future claim to my life, and agreeing to absolute, permanent no contact, or face immediate criminal prosecution for grand larceny, identity theft, and bank fraud. The trap they thought they were springing on me had just snapped shut on themselves. Defeated, trembling, and utterly terrified of facing a bleak prison sentence, my family realized they had zero leverage left. With shaking hands, Chloe picked up the pen and signed the total liability release form, followed quickly by my sobbing mother and stone-faced father. They gathered their coats and quietly exited my office, walking out of my life forever. Chloe was forced to finally get a real job to slowly pay off her massive debts, while my parents had to sell their home to avoid complete bankruptcy, finally forcing them to face the harsh reality of the entitled golden child they had spent decades enabling. I returned to my beautiful life in Boston, feeling lighter than ever before. I realized that the cold paper plate left on my front porch 7 years ago wasn't actually a tragedy. It was the ultimate catalyst that forced me to find my own strength and claim my freedom. What would you have done if your own family left you behind like that? Would you have walked away forever, or given them another chance? Comment your thoughts below, and check out the 2 videos on your screen right now for more shocking stories.